Okay, so we thought since you all have been asking questions of previous panels, we could flip the tables for this panel and ask you guys some more questions. Especially since our panel is on marketing, we thought we'd ask some relevant questions to sort of get a feel for how much people do pay attention to the information they're provided. So it's the same format as the previous questions, but this question is, do you look at food labels before purchasing new foods? So we have, it seems like a solid, like 2/3 of the room at least look at them a little bit, but it looks like another third mostly don't look at them, although the numbers are changing as we speak. So maybe I spoke too soon. But we just kind of want to get a feel to see how much attention people do pay, because marketing is a huge part of advancing a sustainable food system, because if you don't tell people what to do or give them the knowledge of how to do it, it doesn't get done. All right, so our next question is, what information could influence your eating decisions? So if you want to submit answers like maybe you care more about nutritional information, or maybe sustainability is your thing, or maybe like almonds, you have a really sharp focus on water intake that you want to hear about. So we've got flavor, and if you submit submissions, they'll just kind of pop up as they come as a word cloud. So you have flavor, labor, locality, fair trade, I'm guessing what that means, nutrition, standards. So we have a variety of answers, but they do all sort of focus on the quality of the things that you're consuming still. So we do have some sort of unity there. All right. There's new allergies is new, chemicals, ethics, impact. So we've got some good answers here, I think, for us to work with later on in the panel. All right, so our next question, we're moving quickly, is do you identify as vegetarian, vegan, flexitarian, plant lover, meat reducer, omnivore, meat lover, or other? So we give you a lot of options. We were worried after the second panel that you might get a little confused about how you identify. So we have a lot of omnivores, which is not surprising, as that gives you probably the most options of any of these, and a surprising number of vegetarians, like 1/5 of the crowd, which is a solid percentage. And then you're flexible.
Mostly vegetarian.
Mostly vegetarian,
but eat some meat.
I'm a flexitarian.
Flexitarian is you eat vegetarian sometimes, and sometimes just eat a regular diet.
If it's a special occasion, maybe you'll have some meat. It's what you identify as. All right.
I'm just going to, anyone else resonate with the idea of plant forward? Some people have heard.
The new dining hall program, if you've noticed, in a lot of the napkin containers, they're identifying like plant forward as the way to be. We have a lot of omnivores, so we do have a pretty good mix, which is a good idea. All right, next question. If you are reducing your meat consumption, is it because of environmental impact, health reasons, animal welfare, reducing food costs, the way you were raised, or what? This is really interesting to me because most of the vegetarians I've met throughout my life, at least before coming to college, it was all because their parents are vegetarians, so they by default were vegetarians too. And I saw a huge change when I came to college, and it was suddenly kids deciding for themselves they didn't want to eat meat. But it seems it's not surprising that for this crowd, environmental impact is a solid half of all of the people here. Can you still not hear me? Okay. All right, and so finally, what is the biggest barrier to reducing your meat consumption? All right, so we're getting some shifting numbers, but it looks kind of across the board, but nutritional concerns is probably primary, which makes a lot of sense because protein is probably the main reason a lot of people eat meat. All right, so that is our informal poll that we were going to work with in our speeches coming up next. So I'm going to turn it over to Richard Waite.
Great, well, thanks, everyone. So it seems like going a little back and forth in the panels here. We definitely, in the first panel, we established pretty well why we should be thinking about shifting diets away from meat, especially beef, towards plant-based foods. Second panel, we moved sort of into some of the solutions, like how to do this, thinking about behavior change. This last panel, again, an emphasis on sort of the why we should do it, right? So I think in my talk, in the next couple talks, we're going to be drilling down a bit more on the how and bringing in insights from the private sector, from marketing, and also from behavior change. So the real question of how to shift diets at scale, right? Not hundreds or thousands of people, but maybe even millions or even more. So this is a question we've been thinking about at the World Resources Institute a lot over the last couple of years. And the first thing that we did was sort of scan the landscape of what other efforts are currently out there to try to shift people's diets towards plant-based foods. And there's a number of NGO efforts, government efforts. We found that a lot of the efforts focused pretty much solely on arming the consumer with more information. And as we've heard from some of these panels, right, consumers are habitual in nature, right? So information and education probably on its own is not going to be enough to shift diets at scale. Another thing is it seems like there may be an over-reliance on a message of abstinence, right? Go vegan, go vegetarian to save the planet. And this is an issue if only 3% of American adults today self-identify as vegetarian or vegan, right? So what we need to be doing is having sort of friendly messages to the other 97%, because if we say go vegetarian or go vegan, they're going to think, well, we're taking away, this is a big lifestyle change, you're taking away something that I've eaten my whole life and I enjoy. So I said, okay, so our second cut was, well, let's look at examples of large-scale consumption shifts from product A to product B, hopefully a more healthier, sustainable product B, and see what we can learn from them. And it turns out there's a number of these examples. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, just a few years ago, if you look at the egg market, 1% of the market was free-range eggs. Now that's up to more than 40%. Another example from the United Kingdom is there's been a shift from there's been a shift towards people drinking lower alcohol beer. In China, there's been a shift away from shark fin consumption after shark fin soup consumption after shark fishing was recognized as being unsustainable. Here in the U.S., if you look beyond the food sector, we've seen a shift away from conventional light bulbs towards CFL light bulbs and now LED light bulbs. So we looked across like 20 of these different examples to figure out, well, what are the sort of the strategies that keep popping up. And there were 4 main strategies that we've gathered together into what we call the shift wheel. So I'll spend a couple minutes spinning you around the wheel. So on the up in the orange, this minimizing disruption, right? If consumers are habitual by nature, you want to shift them from product A to product B, you have to make it easy for them. So there are things you can do. You can replicate the experience of product A, right? So this, in our context, this is like a veggie burger. You can disguise the change entirely. You think of Hampton Creek's eggless mayonnaise. You spread it on a sandwich. It's basically indistinguishable from the real thing. Down here in the green, you need to sell a compelling benefit. And so marketing experts will tell me that this is marketing 101, right? If you ask a consumer, do you care about the environment? Say, well, yeah. If you ask a consumer, well, do you want to eat more healthy foods? They'll say, yeah, sure I do. And you follow them around in the store, and they're actually making their decisions based on much higher order attributes like price or taste or perceived quality of the food or food safety. So one challenge that we're going to have shifting people towards plant-based foods, and something that David talked to, is meeting the consumer where they are, and especially since we're shifting away from meat, there's a lot of compelling benefits that people think they have when they eat meat, right? It tastes good, fills you up, it's high in protein. So we need to be thinking through what are the positive messages around plant-based foods. Over here in the blue is this maximizing awareness. And so a lot of this is some of the nudges that we've talked about today, right? Constraining the display of or the availability of the food that you're trying to shift away from and making the one you're trying to shift to more prominent. So how do you design a menu? Or how do you design a buffet? Or even how do you make more good options available? If you look across all the entrees that are served across U.S. restaurants, you look at the top 20, 19 out of those 20 are meat-based. Right? You think pizza, you think of pizzas, burgers, chicken dishes. Only 1 out of the 20 is the veggie burger, and it comes in at number 13. So it's hard, right, if you're a vegan or vegetarian, or some of the 97% who just want to eat less, it's hard to find the good options that you want. And another part of this too is if you're there's research out there showing that, for example, on menus, if you put all the vegetarian entrees into a vegetarian box, it actually lowers it lowers the demand from non-vegetarians by 65%. Non-vegetarians are 65% less likely to order those vegetarian meals if they're segregated in a box versus just spread in on the menu. And we also have to have more memorable advertising around the foods that we want to shift to, right? So the meat industry is actually pretty good at this. Pulled pork sandwiches, they're obviously popular here in the U.S., but they've exploded in popularity in the United Kingdom over the last few years. It's actually been through a concerted effort by the pork industry to not only educate consumers and raise awareness, but also work with food service providers, train chefs how to do it, get it on the menu. There's been promotion campaigns, and consumption of it has gone up, so we need to see more of that with plant-based foods. And finally, we talked about social norms in a couple of the panels, too. So obviously, this is where information and education plays into it, right? Over a number of years, awareness gets raised, social norms can evolve. But there are other routes to this, too, like making the product you're trying to shift away from uncool and the product that you're trying to shift towards cool. So I think someone raised it in the first panel. One of the social norms that we have to kind of work against with this issue is the fact that meat is associated with masculinity, right? And that's 50% of the population. So thinking through, who's the right messenger? So I've seen some, for Morningstar Farms, for example, they sell a lot of vegetarian meat substitutes. And they have this documentary out where they profile 5 different people who are switching towards their products, and they show sort of, they've cobbled together sort of, who are some of the unlikely people to do this. So they have athletes, bodybuilders, they have a Hollywood stunt woman, and they have rappers. So they're trying to show, different different aspects of this. So one other thing that we saw about the 20 shifts that we looked at was that in almost every single case, the shift from product A to product B made business sense. There was a financial benefit to the companies involved that were selling formerly product A and now product B. So I think if we're trying to think about how to shift at scale, we're going to really have to crack that business case. Does it make more sense to be selling more plant-based dishes and more plant-based foods also in supermarkets? So building on this research, over the last few months, we've launched this Better Buying Lab initiative where we are working with forward-thinking companies like Sodexo, Google, Hilton Hotels, Panera Bread, Stanford University's dining services, and some others. And we're also bringing in marketing specialists and behavior change specialists to think about how do we apply this, especially in a food service environment, in restaurants and in cafeterias. Trying to design interventions, test them out, and then ultimately scale up the ones that prove successful, and then report externally so it can inspire others in the food industry to do the same. So we're looking at a couple things right now. On the selling compelling benefit piece, we're starting to explore, well, what is the positive language that we want to be using around plant-based foods? Is it superfoods? Is it plant positive? Is it something else? Because a lot of the language, again, it's sort of, is it vegetarian or is it meatless? It's sort of implying what's being taken away instead of what's being given to you through plant-based. And the other sort of on the awareness and the availability piece, we're trying to think through, okay, if only one of the top 20 dishes right now are plant-based, what are some other candidate dishes that could become very popular and ubiquitous across restaurant menus, and working with chefs in the companies that we're working with to develop this. So I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Kristen and Rachel, who are going to tell you that they're the ones who are actually doing the cool stuff. So thank you.
So the last time I sat in this room was in 1995. I took abnormal psychology in here, I believe, while an undergraduate. So hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Rainey, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at Google as far as plant-forward diets. I work on the food program there, which is an internal program for our employees at our offices around the world. So have any of you been to a Google campus before? Okay, a few of you. Have any of you eaten at a Google campus before? Okay, so for everyone else, Google has cafes and micro kitchens at our offices. So to give you just an example, if you were at our Mountain View headquarters, which is just south of San Francisco, you'd have an opportunity when you show up in the morning to eat breakfast at over 200 different cafes. Same with lunch, and then some of them are also open for dinner if you're working late. We also have micro kitchens, as I mentioned earlier. We have over 250 of those on our Mountain View campus, and those are basically little coffee, tea areas where you can take a break, get something like a snack, or get some caffeine to help fuel you through the day. To give you a sense of the scale overall, we're serving 160,000 meals a day, and we're in over 56 countries. Personally, my role is to work on our procurement strategy for how we're sourcing food, beverages, and operating supplies in those regions. And I also work on our energy, water, and waste in our kitchens with a particular emphasis on food waste. So you might think that all we do around there is eat. And we do a lot of eating. But there's a clear ROI for us. So if you think about just the amount of time it might take an engineer to leave in Mountain View, get in a car, go to lunch in the downtown area, park, come back, it would be an hour and a half out of their day at a minimum. Whereas with the program we have, they can walk to a cafe with some of their colleagues, get to know them better, chat over a meal, and come back to work. So there's clearly an efficiency issue there, but it's also a key part of our culture. So Google's been recognized as one of the top places to work for a number of different years, and one of the reasons why is one of the perks, which is the food program. So we're really proud of that, and we realize it's really a way for us to retain and attract top talent. But it's also a way for people to engage. And you never know when a great idea would happen over a meal, as it did with the idea of Gmail, which happened over the back of a napkin at one of our cafes. So our first priority is getting people together over food. That's really the first thing we focus on. After that, we start thinking about how we can change behavior. So whether that's shifting to a more plant-forward diet, whether it's getting just more vegetables and fruit into people's meals, period, whether that's encouraging more non-sugary beverages, or whether that's encouraging the use of more reusable plates rather than disposables. There's a lot of different things that we're working on, and one of the things we figured out is that it's really challenging. We did try Meatless Monday. This occurred before my time at Google. I started about 3 years ago. And what we learned with Meatless Monday is that Googlers weren't excited about it. They didn't like the idea of choices being taken away. To them, it felt more like deprivation. What we have found more success with is other avenues. So we've partnered with the Culinary Institute of America with their Menus of Change initiative that you've heard about a little bit today from others. And we've also been working with other partners like Yale, as well as with the Cornell Brand Lab. And we've been working on a variety of things. The idea of a plant-forward diet is one, but we've also been working on topics like behavioral sciences and food choice architecture to think about how placement and nudges and making the best choice or a better choice, the easiest choice, has been really a form of success for us. So one example is the flip, and many of you might have heard of this already. So the idea basically is that you'd be substituting out for a normal burger, which instead of having 100% beef, instead you might put mushrooms or legumes in there as part of the ingredients, still giving a great mouthfeel, still giving a great taste, but having part of the item be made with mushrooms or vegetables or legumes. We also think a lot about positioning. So we want the salad bar to be the first thing you see when you walk into a cafe. We also think within a salad bar about the placement of ingredients. So can the greens be first? Can animal proteins be the last thing you see when your plate is already pretty full? We think about priming and placement. So we think about the idea when you go into one of our micro kitchens of having whole fruit the first thing you see, and having things like M&Ms behind frosted glass or in closed containers or in drawers that you have to search for. So I'm on the food team. I know exactly what we're doing. My teammates are working on this, and yet I know that for me, when I'm in a Google environment, I'm much less likely to eat chocolate on my way to the bathroom if it's not in my face, where I actually know I have to search for it. So it's really interesting to know that it actually does work. We also think about having sugary beverages behind frosted glass and having water and other non-sugary options the first thing that you see. We also know that messaging matters, so we try to think about how we tell stories and how we communicate with Googlers, how to tell them, this is the vegetable of the day, or make it sound really appealing and delicious. Here's just another example of signage. So many of you have seen some similar diagrams today. This happens to be from the Culinary Institute of America, with the basic gist being the products on the left, like lamb and beef, being very high carbon, and then items on the right, lentils, being much better for the environment. But we know that shifting a Googler who might be consuming a lot of beef and lamb all the way to the other end of the spectrum to the right to eating lentils is a really tough task. So we can think about it in baby steps. We can think about it as a continuous journey. I talked earlier about nudges. I talked about trying to make the better choice the easiest option. But I also think there's a lot of opportunity in seafood. So seafood being, of course, it has to be sustainable, but being one of the sort of middle avenues in terms of our continuous journey of getting from beef to lentils. I also think there's a lot of opportunity with sea vegetables. Our New York office is working with a guy named Bren Smith. If you haven't heard of him, he has a great TED Talk, and I'd encourage you to look him up. But the basic idea of kelp and other sea vegetables being a really nutritious carbon sink, and also taking advantage of the idea of the oceans for farming. But of course, it has to taste delicious, and not everybody knows how to make kelp delicious. So we really rely on our culinary talent to really think about how to make kelp or vegetables really scrumptious. And to be honest, it's been really hard for us to find talent. It seems that more chefs are really comfortable making animal proteins fantastic, and that's just taken a lot more effort to find those who are really skilled at making vegetables taste amazing. So we've learned a few things so far. We've learned that flavor rules above all. It has to taste great. We've also learned that it's better not to take things away. It's really better to try to make the best option the easiest option. We've learned that our culinarians are key, and really getting them the skills that they need to make vegetables taste great is critical. And we've also learned that we really need to act. So we could spend all year thinking about the perfect plan, the perfect strategy, but we know a lot already. So let's launch and iterate and keep going. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? I've realized that Kristen has an advantage with her mouth closer to the head of this microphone. And a shout out to those in the back. Can you hear me all the way in the back? Awesome. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. This is a great topic, as other people said, right? We all eat 3 times a day, some of us 2 times a day, some of us 6 or 7 times a day, if we're lucky. So it's a very important topic. First, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about Sodexo. Are you familiar with Sodexo? If you are, raise your hand. Okay, good. A good number of people. It's a food crowd, so that's good. Sodexo is actually what we call a quality of life services company, and we offer over 100 different kinds of services. However, the bulk of our business really is around delivering food service in a variety of different environments. So you can see here on this slide some of the different locations where we work. Perhaps at a corporate headquarters or another kind of business building environment with business employees serving their employees and guests. In education, and that includes both universities and K through 12. Government office buildings, as well as serving the military. We work in healthcare, a lot of hospitals we serve, senior living institutions and senior living communities, sports and leisure environments. That could be anything from a zoo, museum, aquarium, to a sports venue. And also remote sites, right, which is somewhere where there might be mining, for example. So it's just really varied number of environments that we serve, and at great scale. So Globally, we're in 80 different countries. We serve 75 million customers daily. In those 80 countries, we have 425,000 employees. Sometimes we're the 19th largest employer in the world. Sometimes it's the 18th largest employer in the world. But the bottom line is we have a lot of people that work for us. And we're in almost 33,000 locations worldwide. So the bottom line of all of that is that whatever we do needs to accommodate a wide range of people. We have numerous market niches that we serve, everything from just a very mainstream customer to someone who's interested in a more high-end eating experience. So, and at the very heart of our mission is quality of life. And when we look at our plant-based culinary solutions, we really look at how does that tie into our mission to improve quality of life. So the first things we think about are that, and we promote this to people, tell people about what it is we're doing. 48% of consumers think veggies make a dish more tasty. So we're giving you something more, making something that's going to taste better, versus we're taking away meat, right? Really looking at that positive framing. And it's important for your health and well-being. So there you go. So we're improving your quality of life through the taste experience and through helping you live a healthier lifestyle. And then, as a lot of people have mentioned here, it is also better for the environment, and we know that especially in terms of climate change and also water consumption. So what is it that Sodexo is doing in terms of delivering plant-forward, plant-based solutions at great scale? And we can look at a few different categories of activity. One is really incorporating plant-based choices into everything we create. So if there's a station and it's a taco station or it's a Mexican station, for example, a lot of times there's going to be a customizable option where there's going to be a plant-based option for you. So, while we have specific vegetarian stations, and a station is really just a little concept within a cafeteria, if you can imagine. I imagine you have a few of them in your own cafeteria. So how do we make it so you don't have to go to that special place too? Wherever you go, there's going to be an option for you if you're interested in reducing your meat consumption. Also increasing the prevalence of fruits and veggies on our menus, and then promoting plant-forward thinking. So I'll tell you a little bit about these. This is just saying, when you look at our soups, everywhere you go, there's going to be a plant-based option. And that's really important to us, that it's integrated throughout the environment. That could include soups, it includes the grill, it includes sandwiches, etc. So wherever you go, can you find a plant-based option? We looked recently across the menus that we provide in all of our university, healthcare, and corporate environments, and found that almost 50% of the things you're going to find in the dining environment would classify as either vegetarian or vegan. At the same time, 27% of what you might consider a traditional center of the plate item. What is the item you go up to order, if it's a stew or if it's a kind of a burger from the grill or whatever it is. 27% of those center of the plate entrees are also classified, would also meet the standards of being vegetarian or vegan. So really we're looking at providing more variety, more choices. And I think that is really important. I was looking at some research yesterday from Data Central that's looking at what are the barriers to healthy eating. And I could just go over them. And one, of course, is that eating out, and this is in a quick serve environment, eating out is a treat was the first biggest barrier. The second in the quick serve environment was cost. And just after that was too few options, and that's in terms of healthier options, but I think the same thing applies for options with a lower meat content. And the list goes on. I'm happy to provide more information later if anybody wants. And so then we go to what is this like plant forward thinking and better for you vegetarian choices. Well, some of the things we find, some of the vegetarian options are not so good for you, right? Like sometimes, we want to create a plant-based option, and so you're serving more pizza or something that's very heavy, not very healthy. So one of the things that we've looked to do is create more vegetarian options within our Mindful brand, which is a brand about very healthy eating, and is really focused on a concept of full plates, full flavor, but at the same time also very healthy for you. In the UK, we have an initiative called Green and Lean, right? This is where we get to simple substitutions. This is in partnership with WWF. And the Green and Lean meals are all balanced. No more than 1/3 of the dish is going to be from animal protein. And so you tend to increase the quantity of fruits and vegetables. Some examples could be just taking a favorite dish in a school environment. Maybe that's a beef lasagna, cutting back on that beef consumption, replacing some of it with fruits and vegetables. And still very popular, a chicken biryani. Those kinds of dishes are very amenable to that kind of simple switches. Also, as we had earlier today, the portobello, the mushroom and beef blended meatball, that has been a very successful approach for us in terms of the burgers that we're selling in K through 12 schools, especially for that burger, that K through 8 burger, kindergarten through 8th grade. We've basically taken out 1/4 ounce of the beef and replaced it with mushrooms, and the students love it. It's been so successful now that we have a version that we're going to be offering through our Mindful brand that will be targeted to adults as well, a high-end brand. And in that case, we're able to replace the beef because it has less beef in it, so it's a little bit of lower cost. We're able to replace it with a higher quality beef, antibiotic, hormone-free, et cetera. We're also learning from other changes, and I think a really interesting example here is the Smarter Lunchrooms program out of Cornell, where they found that something like changing the names of fruits and vegetables has been able to increase vegetable consumption 40 to 70%. So instead of just offering carrots, here's your carrots, you could, for younger kids, X-ray vision carrots, trying to make it more of an exciting experience. And then just, we help share with people just easy tips to increase your vegetable intake with the idea that when you do that, you can decrease your animal protein. But again, the focus is on what are you going to get more of? Everything from the My Plate that someone offered earlier to eating your veggies first, perhaps, and maybe you fill up on them and you eat less of the animal protein later. Kristen mentioned, putting greens at the beginning, kind of just trying to crowd out some of the animal-based products. And so that's basically, I guess, what I'll start with, and I'm happy to answer questions. But again, I think it's along the same lines as how do we offer this to people, something that's going to make their lives better, make for a more exciting food experience. And I noticed in the word cloud you showed, right, even among this group of I'm going to call this a highly committed crowd, the top 2 that I saw come up were flavor and nutrition. So that's what we've got to deliver people, and then we've got to do the hard work of figuring out how to do that more sustainably.
All right, so we're going to open it up to questions in just a little bit, but I thought I'd start off with one of my own. So in these discussions, what's really interesting to me is the way that language plays a role. I mean, when I'm in a supermarket, if I see something that says healthy, I think, sure. I'm not necessarily going to believe it. So is there anything that you've noticed in trying to label your items and trying to make sure that people find them actually appealing?
It's a good question. I think there is there's the Smarter Lunchrooms experience that I mentioned earlier, and we've kind of rolled that out. I think in terms of the way that we're going to pitch our burger to adults, I think that will have like an interesting kind of name, still be to be announced, but I think so that's very important there too. I would just say giving something a name is just really important, so there's a variety of different names that appeal, but always testing the name I do think is very important. And the one thing we're trying to figure out with WRI too is, what do you even call this whole category, right? Like flexitarian, plant strong, who knows, plantastic, I don't know what it's going to be, but, how do you name it that's really appealing and positive?
Well, and I think one thing that's interesting there, too, is that people say they're interested in the nutrition benefit, but the healthy label is kind of a double-edged sword, because there's studies out there that show that if you label something as healthy, consumers then automatically perceive it to be less tasty and or less filling. By perception, not only that they'll expect that it'll be less tasty or less filling, but after they eat it, they feel less full than the person sitting next to them who ate the cookie that was not labeled as healthy. So there's something really psychological going on there, and we have to be kind of careful around this health messaging.
I think the labeling issue is really important, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And for a while, we called this seductive labeling, and then we changed the name. But we know that it's important to make the items in the dish sound really delicious, and it's not enough to say something is just carrots. You really need to talk more about how they're prepared. But one of the challenges that we have at our scale is if we were to print, farm names, for example, it's a massive undertaking to just get those correct farm names on each item every day. And then what if you actually run out of that particular item? So there were a lot of challenges just logistically in having much more detail in each label. But bottom line is we know that the messaging is really important, and we still are working on it.
All right, Gordon, do you have a question?
Kristen, and I guess maybe Rachel too, I would think with the kind of changes you're making, you'd be able to quantify data and get relative importance of some of these things. So you've tried a lot of techniques like, messaging and placement and all the kinds of things you described, but you could give us a sort of a rundown quantitatively as to how effective these various techniques are, which would be very, I think be very important for others trying to duplicate the kinds of things you're doing. And then a second comment would be more of a comment. It would seem to me that we've heard a lot about sort of a 50% burger today, and, that has real possibilities to me. I don't know, maybe Richard knows, but, how much of the total beef consumption in the United States is hamburger? And if you're able to reduce that by 50% just by a simple technique, and people really couldn't tell the difference in terms of taste and texture, that is a very sort of easy first step. So I wonder if maybe somebody might want to comment on that.
Yeah, so several thoughts. I guess as far as the metrics piece, one of the things that we've grappled with as a program, so I'm on a team of 30 Googlers, full-time Google employees who handle the oversight and strategy of the food program. And then we partner with over 45,000 around the world, 4,500 food service team members from companies like Compass and Sodexo and Aramark and Guggenheimer and others who are carrying out our program. And one of the challenges we had is that we asked for a lot of data. So when I first came to Google, there were various things I wanted to track, and one of it was plant proteins per capita, beef per capita, seafood per capita, et cetera. But for some of our partners, it's harder for them to track those kind of things, and it's very labor intensive. So the challenge is how much additional tracking do you ask versus just saying, hey, we're pushing towards a plant forward diet, do X, Y, Z. So the metrics issue is something we grapple with. However, we do have a lot of amazing metrics around, for example, food waste through our partnership with LeanPath. Right now, we have the largest pre-consumer food waste data set anywhere with photos anywhere that we know of, and we're trying to figure out how to use that data. As far as the other question about, focusing, for example, on the flip burger, knowing that burgers are a very popular item in campuses, universities, Google, et cetera, I absolutely do think that it's critical to start focusing on some of the items that you know are very, very popular, and that's actually part of the work that we're doing with WRI and the Better Buying Lab project, where we're trying to hone in on a couple of specific items, whether it's tacos or whether it's burritos or burgers, to be able to just try to make a real difference in making those really popular items pushed forward with more plant-forward ingredients.
Yeah, I will just say that I absolutely think the flip, whatever you want to call it, the simple switches, the taking a traditional meat base, because we know that people generally eat more animal protein than they need in terms of their diet. And in many cases, someone can feel just as satisfied. It's not disruptive to their lifestyle. You don't have to get them to do a new thing. And when you add it up across scale, across millions of burgers, across whatever it is, it makes a really big difference. So I think those strategies are great.
I guess I'd just add, so this piece on metrics and targets is sort of the third line of research that I didn't mention during my 5 minutes that we're doing Better Buying Lab, but we're trying to work together to see how, because there's a couple kinds of things that we want to quantify, right? There's for the different interventions, right? Whether it's changing around where things are placed on a buffet or calling something different. We want to figure out what's the effectiveness of those things, of sales of the different food products, and then, and sales of total ingredients. But then we want to go a step further, too, and try to quantify the associated environmental benefits, right? Because if what we're ultimately trying to do is move towards a 2-degree Celsius world, we need to be looking at that, too. So we've been thinking about, what do targets for meat consumption maybe look like? Because this kind of goes back to Tim's first presentation. Like, if agriculture is going to be up here for greenhouse gas emissions in 2050, and we need it to be down here for a 2-degree world, there's all kinds of interventions to get us from here to here. There's reducing food waste, there's making agriculture more sustainable, more productive, increasing productivity, and then there's also the shifting diets piece, and especially the shift away from beef just because of its huge land use impact. So we're looking at trying to use this modeling to develop some recommendations for our partners too about, from an environmental standpoint, how much beef per capita is too much if we want to be on track for 2 degrees Celsius world. And also, sort of to Brent's presentation, how does that track with what data on nutrition tell us? Like, is it also going to be healthier for you? So.
Yeah, and I want to say in terms of that, I do think it's really I think it's great for the NGOs to be tracking this kind of meat reduction kind of thing. For a company like Sodexo, I feel like very strongly that it's kind of like the Meatless Mondays, in terms of what message you go out with externally. You don't want to go out with externally a message that we're taking stuff away from people. It just backfires. So, how do you measure it in a way that shows we're giving people more, better options?
I think that's a really good point too, because companies increasingly are setting like GHG targets, right? Sodexo has a GHG target, so there's lots of different strategies to get you there, right? Increasing energy efficiency, reducing waste, and so it's interesting to figure out, to what extent can these sorts of diet shifts be, what part of the puzzle is it, and then, what's the messaging around it too.
Okay, do you have another question?
The first comment just came to mind when you were giving your presentation, and the impetus seems to be behind this conference is to change people's perception about diet, to shift more plant-based. And just in my mind, I sit here thinking, well, if 98% of the people are consuming the food and only 2% are growing it, why don't we go after the 2% to grow something worth eating, would taste good too. And I'm waiting for somebody to do that, because these guys are sitting on their rural farms and I can tell you who's in their head. If you open up a free ag magazine, it's all of your major food, petroleum-based companies that control the seeds, et cetera, et cetera. How do we get to those 2% that are actually growing the food? The other question that's interesting that you talk about flavor, there's reasons why chefs like Alice Water go to the best farmers that know their soils, because good soils that are mineralized makes flavorful food. And that was sort of a question for the lady here that works for Google. What are your criteria? I mean, at Organic Valley, we know that increasing forages that are into our cows increases the omega-3 levels in our milk. So we encourage farmers to actually feed more than what they have to with NOP rules. And we also make available to our all-grass farmers an extra $1 per hundredweight per 100 pounds of milk they sell to actually go as a just for soil amendments, because we know that mineralizing the soil makes for healthier grass, makes for healthier animal, makes for healthier milk in the end. I'd just like to know what your criteria is when you select for your products, for flavor, for sustainability. Just some comments.
Yeah, so with every procurement decision, we have 5 stakeholders. So it's the users who are actually eating the food, it's the suppliers and vendors, it's the community, the earth, and investors in our company. So every single decision involves 5, which is really challenging, as you can imagine. So what we're in the process of doing now is setting category standards for everything we're buying, whether it's poultry or eggs or beef or produce or coffee or tea or uniforms, in each of the 4 major regions where we're operating. So we're putting those in place now. We're further ahead with the U.S. and EMEA, and now we're working now on APAC and Latin America. But yeah, how the growing practices are important to us. It's one of many things that we're evaluating, and we rely on the procurement managers from the food service companies we're working with, whether it's Sodexo or Compass or Guggenheim or others, to actually be making those choices on our behalf.
Well, also for me, the first part of your question is really interesting because it's been really interesting hearing all of you talk from your organic perspectives as farmers. My family is the opposite end of the spectrum. For 40 years, they were industrial chicken farmers, and now they raise steer for slaughter in the cattle production facility. And it's gross, but at the same time, there's a reason they're doing it. They do it because it makes some financial sense. It's what they know how to do, and also often when you buy into that kind of a production system, you're stuck with it. You have to keep working with it year and year again to recoup the losses that you made the previous year. So I think one of the solutions working with that 2% of farmers who produce most of our food is to give them a way out. I mean, my cousins don't care about, they don't care about the ethical implications of the food that they're growing. They just want to make money. If you can prove to them how it's more financially solvent for them to switch their systems, they'll do it. They don't honestly really care about a lot of the other things that the people in this room do. For them, it comes down to the dollar amount, which is sort of grim, but...
I appreciate you making that comment. It's so important, and working in DC, really looking at what funds are available for transition, they're just almost non-existent. So thank you for bringing that up. Kristen, to your point about looking for chefs, I hope that you're talking to the Culinary Institute and encouraging them to be training more plant-forward chefs. I work with them on the Menus of Change things as well, and we've had many a conversation. So if you can give a nice job, that would be fantastic. The other thing is that, as a vegetarian and a vegan, you can really taste the difference between a chef that is a traditionally sort of meat and dairy cooking chef to one that is a vegan chef, because they know the ingredients and they've had a lot of time to really play with those ingredients. So I'm really happy to have just submitted my nominations for the Culinary Institute and the Eat Forum's awards for plant-forward chefs. But bear that in mind as well. This is such a growing community. And it's really tremendous when, the myth that vegetarian eating people that, don't care about the food they eat or are happy with substandard food, it's actually not true. We really are very, very active in this food space in being creative with ingredients. So thank you for your work and for pushing this forward. And I'm so thrilled that Sodexo is doing the same.
It's a great comment. One quick note is that we do a lot of work with Stanford. We have very similar philosophies on our programs, and a lot of our Google employees were students at Stanford, so it's like this continuum of nirvana. But basically, what I wanted to say is I thought it was very cool. One of the things that they did with their chefs at Stanford is they sent them home for a week and had those chefs live their own lives as if they were eating plant-forward diet at home, and really getting them to really think about it 24/7. And I think that's really just a fantastic opportunity that they did.
So I just want to ask a specific question on what is the most effective thing that you have done that affects the amount of plant substitution for alternative things. But then a second part of this question, I hadn't really thought about this until today, and partially the lunch we had, is the potential role of mushrooms the significance of potentially of mushrooms in replacing beef. And I actually we've never analyzed the footprint of mushrooms and things like that. And if you guys have thought about that, and how big a role can mushrooms play, and not the hallucinogenic types.
Well, I know that the CIA Menus of Change is doing a lot of work with the Mushroom Council, and the key reason mushrooms have been chosen as such a fantastic substitute is because they replicate the mouthfeel. So it's the flavor and mouthfeel that makes that really appealing. But as far as what's sort of had the most impact, I think for us it's really been a combination of a lot of things. It's been the placement of the salad bar, placement of greens as the first thing you see. Also, the idea of signage and messaging, and really talking about this whole idea of a vegetable of the day, which sounds quite basic, but actually really highlighting a vegetable and really celebrating a vegetable. We actually have data that has shown that that's actually been very impactful in the nudging. And then the flip that we've been doing, both from a plant-forward perspective, but we've also done it actually with desserts. So making a larger percentage of items in the dessert fruit as opposed to added sugars, doing that as a flip as well from a nutritional perspective, has been impactful. So I'd say for us it's been a combination of things that has made plant-forward work.
Well, of course, other than what's already been said, I think that something that is also very successful and helpful is the high degree and customizability of dishes, right? When you think about Chipotle, for example, that style of eating where you can go up and kind of choose what you want to be put on your plate or in your dish, in your bowl. I think that is also quite successful in terms of promoting a diet that might have a reduced level of animal protein and increased content of other kinds of fruits and vegetables and some hopefully whole grains.
Hi, I was impressed by a lot of the sort of clever and very sincere efforts that you're using to, in a sense, merchandise the foods that you put out for your customers, your employees, whatever. Some of us, though, are willing to work for chocolate, and we will find our way to
Me too.
to the things that we really love, and I wonder whether even with highly intelligent, if not necessarily dietarily knowledgeable staffs at Google and other places, whether people still don't really know quote what their choices imply in terms of nutrition or environmental impact. And have you tried without, I'm trying to think of how you would do it without being too preachy or in your face, but actually sort of guiding people with, an environmental impact index, that talks about red meat versus vegetables, and you could almost imagine labeling the sections of the food bar that you're talking about with some kind of information that would help people make a real quick kind of assessment of things, whether it's for your own health and nutrition, trying to reduce saturated fat, things like that, or it's again environmental impact. Whether you've tried to actually make that a little bit more educational based.
Well, that's so interesting because that was the whole idea behind the labels that we showed you during lunch, the idea of kind of comparing all of these different metrics at once so that you can take whatever appeals the most to you and make your decision based off of that. But I think there definitely must be a value in allowing people to look at things beyond just nutrition when they're making these decisions.
So we found that the amount of information, it can be helpful, but that it's not enough. So I'll take myself as an example. So this is what I do for a living, and I know exactly that making a choice of lentils is better for me and for the environment than making a choice of beef. However, when it's there and it's if it's easy and it's delicious and I'm very excited about food and I want to try it, I'll probably eat it. And so what we found at Google is that even though it's a very educated audience and many of them know quite a lot about food, that it's not enough, and that those changes in the environment and the nudges and making the best choice easy is really critical. I mean, I work from home a lot. I live in Portland and I work from home a lot. And when I work from home, I eat vegetarian basically every day. But when I'm around meat and it's an option, I eat it much more often than I would when it's not an option. So I think the information and the amount of detail we share, and I think it can't hurt to share more, reminding people of the carbon footprint of beef, for example, or cheese, because I think people don't think about cheese in that way. But I think it isn't enough. I think we really have to make the environment, make it easy for them to make good choices.
Yeah, I would just say I would just second what Kristen said. I think also when you think about, especially at Sodexo, we're catering to so many different kinds of people. I will say we haven't tried it, so you don't know. But my sense of it is people make food decisions based on other criteria. So better for us to do the work in the background. It's my sense of it. But
That's true, because people can make the better choices whether or not they've been educated why the choice, depending on how the choices are presented and what's available. So, I mean, it's interesting too, as people are more and more eating out of the home, right? Now more dollars in the U.S. are spent on food out of the home than food in the supermarket. Although it's not quite the same. There's still more food to eat at home because it's cheaper. But more and more people are eating out of the home, and what people are eating out of the home also influences then what they buy at the supermarket too, because maybe they eat a dish that they don't know how to cook, and then they go to figure out how to do it. So there's a lot of changes that.
yeah, I also think there could be a tendency to overcomplicate the decision, and you don't want paralysis, right? You don't want, like, I remember someone earlier was talking about the ethics class, and then students leave and they have no idea what to eat. You know what I mean? So you don't want to paralyze people.
Just a question on food waste. We haven't heard much about food waste today. And, simplistically, if, you hear these enormous numbers of how much food is wasted along the food chain, whether it's 25% or 40% or whatever, it's a big number. If you could reduce that, and by reducing it, turn it into useful food, you could have a big impact on the amount of food that needs to be grown. And secondly, depends on what's done with the waste, but how does it contribute to climate change?
Yeah, so our approach at Google is to follow the EPA waste hierarchy, which some of you might be familiar with. And the basic idea of that is that there's a lot of great things we can do with food waste, like compost or give to animals or donate to hungry people. But the most impactful thing we can do is reduce it at the source. So that's where we really focus our efforts. And we do that by tracking. So we have a partnership with LeanPath, which is a company based in Portland, Oregon, which basically has a scale and a camera, which we use in our kitchens. And it's a way for us to track our pre-consumer waste. We now have this in over 100 of our cafes. And having that data helps our chefs and their teams understand where there's opportunities to change their production at various stations. So, for example, learning that on a given day, they really only needed to make 8 trays of lasagna instead of 11. So that data helps us really drive behavior change in the kitchen. We've also now started to track post-consumer waste. So that's the waste that a Googler is scraping off of their plate after their meal. And you can imagine that in an environment like Google, where it's a program that's totally subsidized, so that means that the Googlers are not paying for the food. The company is, of course, but the Googlers are not. That it can be easy to take more on your plate than you really need to. And so we're now really trying to share that messaging with them. We now have live dashboards at the 4 sites where we're piloting this post-consumer pilot to share with them this idea of how much food they're wasting. And we've had some great downward trends so far. The other point just to make is that around the messaging is really critical. So I heard a really interesting professor from Stanford the other day who spoke about the idea of social norms in messaging. And his whole point is that it's much more impactful to have a dynamic social norm in your messaging. So, for example, saying an increasing number of Googlers are taking steps to reduce food waste is more impactful than saying 40% of Googlers are taking steps to reduce food waste, which would be static. So anyway, the kind of messaging that we share at that point where people are making decisions is really important. So we're hoping we'll be able to scale that out more and continue reducing food waste largely by reducing it at the source.
Yeah, that's great. The other thing is we're doing some of those measurement activities in the kitchen with LeanPath, a simplified kind of measurement tool we have called Waste Watch at Sodexo. But something that we have been also working on is something called social license, which is just the idea of you show up at a cafeteria toward the end of the shift and maybe some of the trays aren't full, or maybe what you want isn't out there, and how do you help people understand why that is and let people know you'll cook to order at that point, or maybe that you have things in a smaller tray. So how do you work on making some of those changes acceptable to the customer?
Okay. I have a question about the Google 15, which for those of you who don't know, it's a play on the freshman 15. I have a couple of friends who worked at Google, so I was wondering if kind of like a chicken and egg situation, like is this novel approach to food and nudge and stuff like that, did that come from Google because of what they saw happening in the company, or kind of like what Google is doing now to address that, if that is still a problem? And then also, kind of a bigger question for the panel is, where do you see changes coming from? Is it coming from the consumer saying that, like, we want to eat healthier? Or do you imagine it coming from the companies like McDonald's now providing salad and giving people that option to as a food option? So kind of where do you see the demand coming from, and where do you see the change coming from?
So for your first question, it's true that some people might gain weight when they come to Google and they see all this amazing food available to them all the time at no cost. But there are many others who feel that it's actually the healthiest they eat in their day, and for them, they're eating, for them, a lot of them, they're eating the majority of their meals at work. So I think you'll get different impressions from different people. I think the idea of the Google 15 is sort of one of those things people like to chat about, and I'm sure it is true for some people. I don't mean to dismiss that. I think as far as, the idea of kind of being more healthy and more conscious, I think, our company, the food program has been around for about 16 years. We hired a chef at Google before we hired a head of HR. And I think as the leadership of the company have gotten older and now have children of their own, they're starting to think about food choices in a very different way. And what they might have been able to eat at 25, they're not really interested in eating at 40 anymore. So I think that's part of it. And I think, we have quite a thoughtful program, and we have one person on our team whose entire role is to think about wellness. So we like to really think about trying to make those good choices. So I think it's not necessarily coming from, external push. It's really something we're really trying to be deliberate and thoughtful about.
Yeah, I can also comment, and I could just say one of the things I've noticed is what happens in the universities segment tends to become, right, those are the future workforce. So then that tends to filter into what happens in the corporate environment. I find that very interesting. And at the same time, I've found, so I think that there is a change in the environment, and, I don't know if it's chicken or egg, or maybe I should say plant or seed, but, so there's changes in the environment, right? And then parents are more aware, and so then that's also driving some of the changes in K through 12. So there's definitely changes in our culture, especially in the markets that we serve. And of course, Sodexo has a commitment to quality of life, and so, we always think, well, as a food company, you can't ignore that question about, our job is to nourish people, so how well are we doing that?
I think one comment on where the changes are coming from, too. I mean, there's definitely a generational thing going on. So if 3% of U.S. adults self-identify as vegetarian or vegan, if you look at the under 35s, that goes up to 6%, and I'd be willing to bet here on campus that number is even higher. So there's definitely seems to be an emerging market for this plant-based or plant-forward eating, and as Rachel said, then we'll be the workers of the future, too.
Great. I want to return to my point previously about how about connecting people to where their food comes from, because I think that really affects the decision-making process that someone goes through when they decide what food to eat. When they've actually engaged and touched where their food has come from, becomes much deeper than just an intellectual idea. And there's a company locally to here called NRG that's paying for their employees' CSA shares from a number of local CSA farms, and I was wondering if if you guys have ever worked with anything like that, like connecting your own employees to CSA programs in the local area around your place of work, and then if you've seen any or kind of thought about the effects that might have also on their wellness and health and food choices and whatnot.
We have a number of different offices that do offer ad hoc CSA programs that are not officially part of the food program, so it's not like the food team is organizing it. It's more employees have started it on their own. So I know actually in Mountain View there was a CSA, and actually when I was living down there I actually participated in it. And we did have a fish CSA for a while there as well that was all kind of an ad hoc approach. It was a pretty small percentage who were taking part in it, and I think combination of just, I think the ones who were doing it enjoyed it, but I think it's just a lot of factors. I think a lot of people living down there at our headquarters have crazy commutes. So some of them are literally sitting on a shuttle or in a car for 2 hours each way. And so thinking about kind of getting food home and keeping it in a good space is challenging for some to think about. I think it's also a lot of our employees are really time strapped. So between their fairly intense jobs and then commutes and families and what they're doing in their personal life, a lot of them don't have a lot of time to cook, which is, something that we're really trying to work on. We have a number of teaching kitchens throughout various campuses where we're really trying to teach Google employees how to cook. Some of them who've come directly from college literally just don't know what to do in a kitchen. So we're really trying to provide that connection there between learning more about how to prepare meals for themselves.
I think it's also clear the disconnect we have between a lot of our food sources and our food itself. There's some terrifying statistic about the number of Americans who eat at a fast food restaurant every day. And as a kid, there's no way I connected a chicken with a chicken McNugget. Like, they were two different species. I'm fairly certain the McNuggets came from, space. And I think that's one of the changing things about vegetarianism in younger generations is that as they're having access to greater information just through the internet and other valleys, they're having to make that connection and having to realize that for themselves, which I think is a generational shift that's changing.
I would say another just really positive trend is the trend toward gardening programs in schools, with that in mind in terms of giving kids some sense of what it takes to produce food. Obviously, having a small garden in your school is nothing compared to managing a farm. But I think just kind of reconnecting people with the source of food, I think it's a very positive trend that's happening, and I think it's interesting that it comes along with people being interested in healthier and more sustainable food options.
I'll share a quick story and then ask a question. When you were just saying chicken nuggets came from space, it just reminded me that as a former high school math teacher, every now and again I meet with high school students and I teach them about the work I do, and I remember giving a lesson to some of Baltimore's best and brightest about the public health implications of industrial livestock production and how to manage all this manure. And I just remember, I had them work in groups to come up with a solution to these public health and ecological problems. And not a single one of those groups, not any of their interventions had anything to do with changing policy or changing behavior. Every single one was a technological intervention, and one of them was literally to design hazmat suits for the animals to prevent them from releasing gases, and to put a dome over the industrial facilities. And another group said, well, why don't we ship the manure out into outer space so it won't present a public health hazard. So I think some of this maybe comes down to, we live in a culture that has, going back to discussions earlier about magic bullets, we live in a society that puts so much emphasis and reliance on technology as a solution to everything, potentially to our detriment. Anyway, thanks for humoring me in that story. My question is, what you're doing is so inspiring. What do you see as the best plan or strategy to disseminate both the lessons that you're learning and the strategies that you're implementing to other food service providers and to other institutions? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to recall the U.S. military comes to mind as what I believe is one of the largest, if perhaps not the largest, buyer of food in the United States. So how do we get the word out and replicate what you are doing elsewhere? Thank you.
Well, because we work with a number of large food service companies, like Rachel's company Sodexo, like Compass, Aramark, Guggenheimer, and we like to think that we're doing some fairly cutting-edge things with them, and things that we're doing with them, they can replicate in other environments with other clients as well. So that would be one way of having influence beyond the walls of Google. Another way is just in Silicon Valley, having an on-site subsidized food program has kind of become the norm in the tech world as a way to attract and retain top talent. And so a lot of other companies are seeing what Google's doing and replicating. And in fact, a lot of our former food team members are going to those other companies and starting programs at those places. So they're essentially bringing a lot of what they've learned or practiced at Google to those environments too. So that's just another way that we're sharing those learnings. We're also just in a number of different partnerships. So you heard from Rich that Google is part of a partnership with WRI that Sodexo is also involved with called the Better Buying Lab. And that's a chance for a number of different companies to get together and think about how to sort of popularize and mainstream certain plant-forward dishes and how to talk about it. So I think through some of these industry collaborations, whether it's WRI or we're also part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, has an initiative called Fresh, and that's also an opportunity for a number of different companies to collaborate over various initiatives like this. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, both in in terms of just collaborating with other companies and sharing learnings.
Yeah, I think to follow up on that, so with the Better Buying Lab, so we've got a group of something like 8 or 10 companies now that we're all working together. It's this sort of collective learning and testing out of different solutions. But it's our intention to then publish what we learn, and then kind of get the word out through all these different networks, right? So Sodexo's got tons of clients that you work with, right? Stanford University is part of a consortium of, I think, 20 or more other universities who are thinking through this question of how to shift diets. There's also like the Culinary Institute of America, the Sustainable Restaurant Association in the UK. So there's all of these platforms out there if we can share lessons learned and best practices, which is our intention.
Yeah, and I would just say the cool thing about Sodexo is that we're in so many different environments, so we have the opportunity to influence what happens on a wide range of corporate campuses, among, think about all the doctors and nurses and other kinds of staff that work at a hospital, as well as the patients and their families. So, just think about how you can influence so many different kinds of environments. I think that's one of the things that's exciting for me.
I think that's all that we have time for, but we have a coffee break right now, so we all get to take a little break.